Hello and welcome once again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are the
FAIRtax Guys.
And we have got something, I would call this nothing short of spectacular to share with you today.
A great program coming up, a new campaign that's going to be furthered by the Americans for Fair Taxation in our final push to get the fair tax enacted into law.
Now, I'm normally not all that excited about marketing hype and campaigns, advertising campaigns and stuff like that. This one's different.
This is different because the times are different, all right? As we'll hear the interviewee explain, the next, I would say, 16 to 18 months are going to be critical, all right? All the planets are aligned for real tax reform, not just nibbling around the edges, not just putting, and you'll hear this phrase, putting lipstick on a pig, all right? Not just going to a flat tax, which gets unflat very quick. Real substantive tax reform in the form of the fair tax.
Well, it's amazing to me. The fair tax has been around since the mid-'90s. I think it was hatched in the mid-'90s.
Yep.
It's been in Congress every year since '99.
Yep.
Well over 15 years we've had this thing. It's been bottled up in committee. I'm amazed that nobody has come up with this marketing idea before now, because we have got big problems in this country.
Yeah.
And we need
the fair tax. We need a big solution.
There you go.
Big problems require a big solution. Now, what are some of these big problems? We're going to talk about this a little bit before we actually get to the interview with Randy Fischer. This is right out of FAIRtax Friday. Folks, if you're not getting FAIRtax Friday, go to fairtax.org, sign up for the newsletter. It comes, as you might expect, every Friday in your email basket. And this one, what the IRS isn't telling you about identity theft. By now, we all know that the income tax identity theft is a major problem. According to the General Accountability Office, the IRS paid out $5.8 billion with a B, billion dollars in bogus refunds to identity thieves for the tax year 2013. And according to the GAO, the real figure is probably significantly higher because of the difficulty of knowing just how much income tax fraud there really is.
And you don't have to be a 1%er to be a target here, because I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, a lady I know who's just barely getting by, lives in a mobile home that's 20 years old, and makes it but just barely. She got her identity stolen, and her income tax refund was taken. Identity
thieves are equal opportunity thieves. I mean, they can steal from everybody. Now, this article, this is kind of like the ads on TV, but wait, there's more. If you are a victim of identity theft, it takes an average of 278 days to resolve your claim and get your refund, even though the IRS will tell you it takes about 180 days. All right, but wait, there's more. Meanwhile, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration is warning taxpayers to be on the high alert for scammers posing as IRS agents who call unsuspecting taxpayers and threaten them with heavy fines and even jail time if they do not pay the supposed fines immediately. And some people fall for that.
I don't want any more. How much more is there?
And this is the worst part. Bob, you're not going to believe this. In its infinite wisdom, Congress has passed legislation that requires the IRS to hire private collection agencies to go after the taxpayers who owe money to the IRS. So, after years of the IRS telling taxpayers that the IRS does not initiate contact with taxpayers by the telephone, and therefore if someone calls attempting to collect money for the IRS, it's a scam. Now, taxpayers will be receiving phone calls on behalf of the IRS attempting to collect overdue taxes. I mean, how can you get any worse than this? It's unbelievable.
That is a big problem. And we need a big solution for that.
Yep.
And I tell you what, this campaign is just coming out. In fact, Randy was sharing parts of it with us at some of our volunteer meetings before it actually became official. And a lot of thought and a lot of debate and a lot of back and forth went into this thing.
Yeah.
And we think it is going to be, it's going to be absolutely crucial that we, those who support the fair tax, have got to have something that we can catch the ears and eyes of our legislators with, or Congress critters, as you call them.
Yep.
And I think this is it. If we can convince people that the fair tax is a big solution to big problems, they'll be much more likely to get on board with it, and that's much more likely to put pressure on their legislators to make it happen.
And that's what we need. We need the people to get on board. And I'm not going to steal Randy's thunder. We're going to let him explain exactly what's going on in the interview here, and then Bob and I will comment on it.
All righty, let's get right to it. Our interview with Randy Fischer from Americans for Fair Taxation, all about the big solution. Okay, FairTax Power Radio today is pleased and honored to be one of the vehicles through which the Americans for Fair Taxation will be rolling out what I think is going to be an absolutely sensational campaign. And we're equally pleased and honored to have one of the primary architects of that campaign here on the program today. Welcome, Randy Fischer, who is the National Social Media Director, among other things.
Good afternoon, Bob.
Thank you for your time. We sure appreciate it.
I'm happy to give it. Oh. I'm all in for fair tax.
Amen. Well, I'll tell you what, I've seen bits and pieces of this thing. You've kind of shared some of the previews with us. This was under development with our local fair tax volunteer meetings. But today we're going to pull the curtain all the way back and introduce the country to
America's Big Solution, Pass the Fair Tax.
Amen. I like that name because I tell you what, America has got some big problems, and the tinkering around the edges and all the politics as usual that we've had for the past decades ain't going to cut it.
Absolutely. And the fact is, we have an existing base of support of well over 300,000, probably up close to 1 million, but the 300,000 number are the core. We can take that core and energize them and reactivate the ones that have become kind of disconnected through a very simple process known as a voter tree. And I'll be happy to explain some more about that.
Okay. But I was just thinking that one of the things you do is the social media for the fair tax.
Absolutely.
And so kind of take us back a little bit. How did this all come into being? And then we can go over what it is and dig into some of the details.
All right. I'd kind of like to back up, go through my understanding of the history of how fair tax has been promoted and
Sure.
how it was sold. Before 2014, FairTax was a run-at-the-top, very closely held organization called Americans for Fair Taxation. Americans for Fair Taxation still exists. It's a nonprofit. And now, different than the way it was, it's totally grassroots run, grassroots managed, and totally focused on growing the grassroots.
Yeah, so the Grassroots board of directors took over from these Houston businessmen who hatched the whole thing and put it on the map.
Correct. And up until 2012, they had a lot of resources because of these businessmen. They were able to spend pretty significant money. They spent a considerable amount of money on some consultants, both consultants early that did the research on the fair tax, which we still use today, and some of that needs to be updated. But they also spent a lot of money on consultants who tried to tell them how to pass fair tax by trying to do it in Washington. Their theory was the grassroots will follow and grow itself, and if we can put pressure on Washington and do the same old that's always been done in Washington by getting co-sponsors, we can pass fair tax. Well, that process really never worked. It was one of these situations where the consultants recommended spending, leading up until 2007 when Mike Huckabee ran for office as President of the United States, 2007, 2008. There was a move on to build a fair tax movement with Mike Huckabee. The consultants wanted to showcase Mike Huckabee's campaign, even though they were a 501c4 and couldn't come out directly supporting a candidate. Mm-hmm. They decided that they would hold some major rallies. So they did things like rent 7 or 8 buses, and they did a bus tour around Iowa. They held some big rallies. They got a few high-profile people like John Stossel to come in and speak at a rally. And it definitely swelled the movement. But there was no follow-up. There was no continuing connection between Houston and the grassroots that was enough to keep the movement growing. So when Governor Huckabee did not succeed in that effort in 2008, they went back to a strategy of trying to pass the fair tax through Congress by focusing on congressional sponsors. Their social media program at that time was pretty good, but not anywhere near as good at trying to reach a broader demographic than what we've been focusing on since 2014.
Social media itself has been just evolving dramatically in the past, 7, 8, 9 years as well.
Absolutely. I mean, between 2008 and 2014, you had the growth, just astronomical growth of Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Vine. All of these social media sites have competed against each other. I'm so old, I even remember when MySpace was still...
Yeah, I vaguely remember that one too.
Well, what they did on their social media was they tended to stay very safe. They never posted anything that was likely to produce any kind of untoward reaction, so to speak, back against the page.
Don't offend anybody. Right?
Absolutely. That seemed to be their theory. And as a result of that, there was very low engagement, meaning the amount of shares, likes, comments, and replies were moderate, but they never got anywhere near some of the levels that they should have been reaching. So in 2014, the new board of directors took over at that point. One of the board of directors, a gentleman from Texas by the name of John Grafer, had a pre-existing connection with a social media company, which was then headquartered in Los Angeles. And he set it up so that he would fund that company to do the social media for FAIRtax for 1 year at a pretty substantially reduced rate. That company took over in July 2014, and at that point, the Facebook page, if anybody ever follows Facebook and they see how many likes a page has or doesn't have, for example, the NRA, I believe, has close to 12 million page likes. Well, the face likes at that time on the FAIRtax page were about 121,000. This company took over, and they were able to change up in terms of the graphics used, which were much more appealing to a younger demographic. And you could see a shift a little bit in terms of the people that were now starting to like the page and use the page, but they didn't really take it to the point where there was a lot of interaction and engagement between the page and the page followers. They were wonderful at being able to create content, but they weren't very good at being able to understand what would trigger engagement among the grassroots. So they kept the social media going. They focused on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, but again, it was not growing at a really rapid pace. In the year from July 2014 until we took over in July 2015, the page likes grew about 18,000 approximately, which is not great, but it's better than it was.
Getting there.
Yes, sir. And right now, when we started, it was at 132,000 approximately. We're now closing in on 164,000, and that's since July 15th until now. So we've been able to kick up some dust, so to speak. And the way we've done it is we've changed up the content. We have tried to interject a little more humor. We try to interject more controversy. Some things on the surface appear to be partisan. They're not supposed to be. But certainly, if you're inclined to read everything as partisan, you can take them as partisan. So it's been interesting trying to learn how to do social media to promote a public policy. Mm-hmm. I've never done that in my life. I spent 36 years as a communicator, talking to small groups, mainly juries, and I know how to communicate. But when it comes to things like mass marketing through social media, I was sort of a dunce, and I've been learning on the job.
You picked it up pretty well.
Well, the problem with it is it's bigger than one person. So we put together a volunteer team, and they're pretty broadly spread in demographics. As you might expect, several retirees, a gentleman in Kansas by the name of John Collett, another one in South Carolina, John Steinberger, David Boone in Minnesota. I don't know that anybody will recognize these names or be interested in it, but we've got at least 12 people on the team. The most important thing is we have 2 or 3 that are under 50, and that helps. Mm-hmm. So this team meets every other week, fairly formal meetings. We keep minutes. There's always an agenda. And we've gone through a succession of projects up until November of 2015 when we ran into Scott Peterson. Scott Peterson is the owner of 3 companies in Nebraska. He's also a very strong FAIRtax supporter. Mm-hmm. One of his companies is called Chase Marketing. And Chase Marketing, among other things, does political campaigns. So as a volunteer, Scott has become key to the movement, in my opinion. And as time went on, Scott recognized that we needed to approach marketing and selling FAIRtax just like you would approach and market selling a candidate. Mm-hmm. Just from the standpoint that you can't expect 100% of the people to get it, to want to support it, and to do anything in order to support it. Mm-hmm. At best, you may be looking at 50 to 60% of the people, if that. We've actually gotten to a point where I think under 50% of the population votes now.
That's sad.
And because of that, Scott said we have to do 2 things. One of them, we have to make FAIRtax easy to sell for the grassroots activists that want to promote FAIRtax. The other thing we have to do is make FAIRtax easy to buy for the public. Mm-hmm. They've got to have a place they can go where they can easily find one thing that they like, one thing that they support, and connect with it. And it's all about making that connection. One of my observations in the years that I've tried to promote FAIRtax is it's not easy to understand and explain. It takes a minimum of 3.5 minutes if you're going to give any detail at all. And because most of us are so wrapped up in it, we tend to go on well beyond 3 to 3.5 minutes. Mm-hmm. When you get to the 3.5 minute point, most people's eyes start to glaze.
Your attention span is expired.
One of 2 things happens. Either they tune you out or they roll their eyes and say it's never going to happen because it's too complicated to them.
Yep.
But if you can make it simple, if you can show them here's a big economic problem that this country has that directly affects you. Not enough full-time jobs? We have a solution for that. It's America's big solution. It's a tax plan that creates millions of jobs. You're worried about the IRS and how they might abuse you or invade your privacy? We have a solution for that. It's America's big solution. It closes the IRS. And with a lot of people, you don't have to go any further than say, it closes the IRS and you will never have to file another personal tax return in your life. If you connect on that one point only, they may never learn much more about the FAIRtax. And technically, they don't really need to learn a lot more about it in order to support it.
Well, I know that in my personal experience, when I've dealt with people and tried to explain to them what the fair tax was, they may have heard of it. But the biggest obstacle I see is that people just seem to think the fair tax, the flat tax, this tax, that tax, every candidate out there has a different tax plan. And we need to differentiate the fair tax from all of those other plans because it is so radically different, and people really haven't got that yet. We're working on that now with this solution.
Absolutely. And when we get to the point of connect, which is the first step, find their issue, connect them to that issue, then connect them to a new website, which is going to be a companion website to fairtax.org. And it's an easy site to remember because if you think of FairTax as America's big solution, you simply go to bigsolution.org. And when they get to bigsolution.org, there's a nice big button there that says connect. Mm-hmm. And as soon as they connect, they fill in their name, their address, their email address, their city, state, zip code, and the system then immediately gives them feedback. It sends out an email that says, you are now connected to FairTax. Welcome. Your congressional district is, and here's the information on how to contact your congressperson about FairTax.
And that's part one of a 3-part interview with Randy Fischer of Americans for Fair Taxation regarding the Big Solution campaign and the 4 steps therein. Again, we're talking about the first one here, connect. Yep. If you can't connect someone to an issue, if you can't point out why it's important to them, then you're not going to get their attention. And the fair tax is a big solution for so many problems that we who are in the fair tax passing business here, actually not business, we're all volunteers, but those of us who have a vested interest here in making sure that the fair tax does become law, are trying to connect with as many people as we can. And this works really well. But again, because it is such a great solution for such a wide variety of problems.
It's kind of like the old saying, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Well, we can't build up a base of support if we don't connect with people first. And that's why it's the first button. When you go to bigsolutions.org, connect will engage you so that you can put in your name and address so they know where you live, all right? And, of course, when they know where you live, they know who your congressman is, who your 2 senators are, who you can then write to and so forth. I believe there's going to be a connection through PopVox. I think I'll leave that till later. I think Randy talks about that later. I know Randy has contributed to a lot of our meetings in Marion and Alachua County where Bob and I live. We have a series of meetings every month, and Randy is a great contributor to those meetings. So anyways, the connect button, to build up this overwhelming, huge base of support, you have to get people engaged. So the website itself is very simple. It's got those 4 buttons. We'll talk about the others as time goes on. But it's also got a list of, like 30 or 40 reasons why would you like the fair tax? And it goes down through them. I don't have them in front of me, but it gets rid of the IRS. It untaxes the basic necessities of life. It makes the border taxation neutral, on and on and on. Somebody is going to find something in that list that trips their trigger.
Yeah, well, I'm unemployed. I need a job.
Yeah.
I don't have enough money. I'm barely making ends meet. My job has been exported to Mexico. All the different problems that people face, and the fair tax fixes them all.
Yeah, it does. It is amazing. And Bob and I have talked about this before in previous episodes of Fair Tax Power Radio. The fair tax is a tax bill, but there are so many other aspects to it that it relieves. And that's because the current income tax is harming our country in so many ways.
The fair tax is the greatest jobs bill ever created.
Yeah, it'll just by default be a jobs bill because it's going to improve the business climate. It's going to relieve business people of a lot of nonsense, a lot of paperwork and hocus pocus around the tax, that it's going to make them, it's going to give them time to spend on growing their business instead of just complying with the tax code and avoiding an IRS audit. there will be no audits. Well, on the business side, their paperwork will be reduced 90%.
There'll be no audits of individual taxpayers.
Right,
Now, the
right.
states who enforce compliance with their various sales taxes will be the agents through whom the fair tax is collected, and that enforcement mechanism stays in place.
Yeah.
But then they're looking at just what they said, like 90% of the sales come from like 500 big companies in the place.
Yeah.
So all the enforcement activity can be focused in the area where it's going to do the most good.
Of all the businesses that directly interact with the consumer, there's, as Bob said, there's a small number, Walmart, Target, up in the Midwest, Myers and so forth, Sears, all these businesses that directly interact with the consumer. There's a relatively small number of them. And they're already, in 45 of the 50 states have a sales tax, as Bob said. And they're already doing that. So the infrastructure is already in place. And they're the ones that are going to interact with the consumer. And that'll be it. As we've explained before, you go to the store, you buy something, you've paid your federal taxes. It couldn't be more simple. So simplicity, job creation, economic stimulus. There's just so many things that are so good about it. But first, you got to connect. Go to bigsolutions.org and press that connect button and put in your information. We really need you to help us help you.
Yeah, because this year, this being the election year, of course, tax reform is one of the really hot button issues. And the one thing that you got to be careful of, the politicians will try to tinker around the edges and then tell you they've done this great big, solution thing, and they haven't. And if they actually can succeed in getting something through that is not the fair tax, they'll say, well, don't talk to us about tax reform for the next decade. We've already done that.
Yeah.
So we've got to get it, and we've got to get it now.
And like I said, the planets have aligned. Paul Ryan is now the Speaker of the House. He was the Ways and Means chairman. And now Kevin Brady is the Ways and Means. Both of these guys are devoted to substantive tax reform. Kevin Brady, as you'll find out, is an original co-sponsor of the fair tax. That means he's been a co-sponsor since 1999, longer than I originally realized. So the possibility of getting the fair tax in is better than it's ever been before. The next 12 to 18 months is going to be critical.
Yeah, but don't let the politicians sell you a small solution for a big problem, because that's what they're going to try to do, no doubt about it.
Yeah, because there's a lot of politicians that are in it to line their own pockets. And those K Street lobbyists, they're going to step right up. If we end up with a flatter tax, the K Street lobbyists couldn't be happier, because they get to start all over again.
Mm-hmm. And so bigsolution.org. But, of course, that's not the only place. We still need you to go to PopVox. We still need you to contact your representatives. We still need to go to town hall meetings and ask candidates questions. But bigsolution.org is a wonderful place to really become educated about what you can do to make this happen and make it happen now.
Yep. And there's more to that website, which we'll talk about in the parts 2 and 3 of the interview.
Okay, yes, Randy Fischer, again, he did a really great job. He, again, was one of the primary architects of this big solution idea. And I think that is something that has to catch on. People have to understand that the fair tax is a big solution for some mighty big problems.
That's
okay?
right.
So we'll be picking up this interview in the next couple of episodes of FAIRtax Power Radio. Until then, this is Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
The FAIRtax Guys, reminding you the fair tax, once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Fair tax is coming. Don't stand